This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 10:08 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast.
Week 2 of the mess in Israel.
Yeah, or I should say this mess in Israel.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing saga, and I wish, never mind.
Well, I was noticing, from dear old Google, that the Jews are relatively new in that part of the world. Is it, 2,200 BC that they've occupied?
BCE. Yeah.
What's BCE?
Before the Common Era. That's the...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, CE or BCE. That's...
Okay.
Educational sources will use that terminology.
I gotcha. Okay.
That
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Fewer and fewer people know what the other initials stand for, but yeah, it does make sense.
Common Era. Yeah.
It is the
Okay.
Common Era. And it's the calendar that a lot of people are using, even though there are many cultures that have calendars that go earlier. And, it's... So here's the piece, right? There have been Jews living in Israel, but there hasn't been a state of Israel. There hasn't been a country of Israel for many, many years. The Romans destroyed it after they put down the Bar Kokhba rebellion. There never again, until the modern state of Israel, was a Jewish country in that area.
Really?
Yeah, there have been
I didn't
Jews
know.
living there, but there have also been, they're probably not Canaanites. There's DNA evidence that that's probably not the case. But I do believe that the Arabs that are living there now, that some of them, many of them, have had what I would call ancestral homes. They're more than 2 or 3 generations, right, that have lived in that area. And when Britain came, you got to go back to Britain. So,
Gosh.
right, Britain wanted to dissolve the Ottoman Empire and destabilized it. They had this plan with France and with Russia to carve up the Middle East, especially as oil was being discovered. They had their own A, B, and C, just as Oslo has an A, B, and C. So it's easy to get confused. But they wanted to break up the Ottoman Empire, which was far too strong for them. And there also was a sense that they needed to distract Germany so that they could win in Europe. And they could do that by attacking their ally, creating an allied relationship between the Ottoman Empire and First World War Germany, the Kaiser. And so they started disrupting the area back then. And they secretly, the Pico-Sykes Agreement divided up the land according to their desires, according to Ottoman administrative areas, in which they considered a big chunk of what is today Israel as Palestine, but as the Jerusalem district. And their goal was to have a path to the sea for the oil that they wanted to grab in Iran and Iraq, and have an easy way to bring it across to England. And so they show a division of land coming down through what it becomes Jordan and heading out to the sea at about Gaza in that general area. And of course, we know they wanted the Suez Canal and all of that. That was aimed at having an easy shipping route between India and England. There was a lot of very imperialistic British, and that's where some of that imperialism argument comes from. So that's right after World War II. That's the same time that Herzl and his crowd are starting what I would call Jewish nationalism. Okay, so they're starting to want to have a country, a Jewish homeland. And candidly, Israel, the area that's now Israel, is just one of the places they looked at. It wasn't the only one. It was the preferred one because of Jerusalem. There's always been at least a small Jewish community that lived in the old city of Jerusalem, the walled part.
Okay, yeah.
Over the years, that came to have a Christian, and that's why if you listen to some of the rhetoric coming out of the militant Islamic group, is you hear Christians referred to as crusaders, because they're still fighting that war.
The Crusades?
Well, yeah, they call Christians crusaders. And so they're going to talk about Jews and crusaders, but they'll usually say Zionist and crusaders. Right? And sometimes when they're being a little bit clever, they're distinguishing between Zionists and Jews, because they're not two mutual groups. They're not synonymous.
Okay.
Many people are in both camps, but some are not. Some Jews are not Zionists, and some Zionists are not Jews. So they're not synonymous terms. And Britain divides up the area, and they promise both the Arabs that live in the area they call Palestine and the Jews that live in Palestine, which are about a few 100,000 at the time when they first the mandate of Palestine. It's not even an independent country, and this is where some of the other rhetoric comes from.
Yeah.
Right. And so you've got Jews and Palestinians, or Arabs, living in this area that Britain's calling Palestine. They have postage, they have all kinds of things. At one time, what's now called the Jerusalem Talmud was actually called the Palestinian Talmud, because it's the rabbinic literature written in Judea and in Jerusalem. But realize that Rome basically destroyed Jerusalem and it was rebuilt. So there's been ruins there for millennia, as you pointed out. And at the time when Britain divides it, there is a huge, an overwhelming Arab population in the area. The Jews are small. And with things happening in Europe and the pogroms, particularly in Eastern Europe, and the Eastern European Jews not being welcome into Western Europe, because they looked at them as being other, at being unwashed and uneducated by European standards.
Oh, please.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's all of
Come
this
on.
garbage going on. And so Israel, or the land of Palestine at the time, or the British Palestine, is a good area to get out of Europe. And so waves of Jewish immigration start. And with them comes a clash of cultures, because they're bringing that Eastern European / Asian, Eurasian culture. And it is very different from Arab indigenous culture. And if you listen very carefully, one of the things that I tell people, I listen. I spend a lot of time listening. So I listen to what the West Bank people, when they harass the checkpoint guards, say. And one of the things that they say to them in Hebrew is, where do your parents come from? They come from Europe, don't they? See, they're hearkening back to this immigration idea. And there's a couple of reality numbers. 26% of Israeli citizens were not born in Israel. They're immigrants to Israel. Even though they have citizenship, they're not native, they're not Sabras, which is the term for a native born.
Well, now, wait a minute. I mean, if the country wasn't created till 49, there would
48, but yeah.
Or 48, there would be
limited
numbers
there'd be
people born there.
Yeah, but the population is not entirely double hockey sticks and older.
I get it. No,
okay.
I get it. Yeah.
And even I am thinking, and maybe I'm wrong, that 26% is not counting people who lived in the area before the state was created and were born there. I think those are considered native born. Right. Just as Washington was considered native born in America.
Right.
because he was born before there was a country, but he was born in the land that becomes the country. And so Britain promises both the Arab population, in return for destabilizing the Ottomans, that they will have self-determination.
And what does Britain get? Oil.
And Britain gets oil.
Jeez.
And so, right, so Britain colonizes all the way from India, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon is French, right? They divide up the real estate in the Middle East into these little colonies and protectorates and mandates. And they also promise the Jews in the area because they perceive the Jews as having tremendous public opinion, being very numerous in the world and having influence, which, you know, Jews do have influence because we are a well-connected group. So you've got all of this going on. And in 48, when Britain says, you know what, we can't take it anymore, there have been waves of Jews. There's something like 600,000 Jews in about 1800, in about 1,000,008, something like that, population. So it's about a third Jewish at the time. But by the British division that they do, the Balfour Declaration, they give a lot of land to the Jews. But if you look at it, it's really not sustainable right at West Bank, Gaza. It's divided somehow, but it's kind of like a four corners thing. So it's a very not great division. And a good chunk of what Israel gets is the Negev, which of course is desert. Mm-hmm. And it's not the farmland. The fertile part is up in the north. And yes, Israel makes the north really bloom. They really haven't made the Negev bloom so much as that some hothouses, yes, but they haven't really turned that into a lush green area. So there's narrative going on. I guess that's the best way to put it. But there's a huge West Bank area. And when Israel declares Jordan the Hashemite kingdom, which is one of the big groups that Britain promised so much to, they want to establish the caliphate in their name instead of the Turks having it, because they view the Turks as being outside. They view themselves as being closer. They're physically closer to Mecca and Medina. They consider Hashem means coming from the caliphate of ancient times. So they want to take over. Again, they want a seacoast. Jordan doesn't have one. So the easy way to do that is to push from the river to the sea. So they annex the West Bank, and war is declared in 48 when Israel declares itself. It says, we're going to take the land that Britain's giving us.
Which is why some of the protesters are saying from the river to the sea. Mm-hmm. Wow, boy, you're putting it all into perspective.
Yeah, you start to get where the roots of these narratives are anchored. And what you have to realize is that so if we divide it into Arabs and Jews, which is kind of a weird thing because not all Arabs are Muslim, some Arabs are Jews. That's for lack of a better word, it's not an ethnicity, it's a kind of a racial thing. And we know that race is arbitrary, right? Race is a social construct that the Brits use to define people as not white.
As you say, we're all one race.
Right. You know, you look at South Africa, right? South Africa said, well, there are blacks, there are Indians, and they don't mean feather Indians, they mean dot Indians. And there are non-whites, colored, and there are whites. And they ascribed rights according to those ethnic features, those racial, quote unquote, features, which are minuscule. I'm sorry, there's just not a whole lot of real difference between quote unquote races. Races is a social artificial construct. And that doesn't mean racism. Racism is horrible, and it exists in all people. All of us are racist, including you and me. We've worked at it so it's less blatant. but that doesn't mean it's not still inside a little bit. And it comes out in terms of othering. If we look at quote unquote the others and throw them all into one basket because they're other, then we're guilty of what's called out-group bias, outside homogeneity bias. They all look alike. There's a wonderful story that's in one of the videos I show one of my classes, and that was in a town, a group of Black teens started taking purses from Asian women who were shopping in Chinatown. And the reason they did that, for the longest time, they couldn't make any arrests because the Asian women could not identify who had stolen the purse. They couldn't pick the perpetrator out of a lineup because they had other out-group homogeneity bias. All of the Blacks looked alike, and the Blacks knew that. So they knew that their face was their mask, was what the guy in the video says. Right? If they couldn't see them apart, then they were safe. They were this big mob, and you couldn't identify one from the other, so you couldn't arrest anybody. So
something just happened with your camera.
Yeah, it did. It just decided to do a thing.
Oh, technology.
I love technology when it works.
And that's the operative word.
That's the operative word. So, okay, it's going to start again. Yeah, it was live. Now I want it to be live again. So we're going to get there. Technical interruption for asking a rabbi again. It's not going to come up. Oh, you're giving me a real pain, computer. It has its moments. So let's go someplace and let's try going back. Maybe that'll reset the little beast. No, it's not resetting. Okay. Anyway, so it's going to be on my stream, hopefully. It looks like it is, although it's saying lost and it's blinking. That's not a good sign.
We'll loan you ours.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I might add we're on your internet, sir.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, just, after the show is over, if you want to watch it again, go to WPSL TV on YouTube.
There you go.
Yeah.
So we'll be where we are. Oh, stream resumed. Thank you. I'm trying to figure out now if it went back to me or if it's continuing in the old one. Yay, technology. Just now. So we'll reshare that.
It's either you or Taylor Swift, one of the
I get it. Anyway, so back to the issue in we've got this attitude of the Brits that in fact is very white dominant, very racist. I'm going to call it for what it is. And they are being a little bit preferential toward the Jews because they view the Jews as quote unquote more white, but not white necessarily. Because there's still an otherness sense. There's a real bad in-group, out-group bias that's rife in that period. And big chunks of the world still follow it. People in the US still follow this idea. Human beings, there's a great line in the movie Best of Enemies. And if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend watching that.
Never seen it.
Best of Enemies is about the desegregation of the schools in Raleigh, North Carolina, which was the last school in the country to desegregate. And it's the story of C.P. Ellis, who was the president, the Cyclops of the Klan. And
we did see this on the bus, as I remember.
Okay.
Going on a road trip.
And now I'm forgetting the activist's name. It slipped out of my head just in that second.
C.P. Ellis.
C.P. Ellis, yep. And she's a black activist, and it's how they work together with a guy out of Durham from the university who comes down and runs a charrette. And C.P. Ellis is the deciding vote. that actually opens the doors to desegregating the schools. So it's really, really huge. And it's a story of how people can learn to stop othering. And C.P. Ellis does it because he respects military folks. That's who he respects. And one of the people who's on the white side, right? So they're whites and blacks in the charrette, and it's very consciously a 6-6 group, half black, half white. And one of the whites that's picked at random he owns a hardware store in town, and his staff, his staff is all black because that's who he fought with in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And he explains that to C.P. Ellis. And as C.P. Ellis is walking away from him, he says, my manager also served in that military. And so when you start to see people as people,
Mm-hmm.
then you have to treat them differently. And we have a historic record of not treating people like people. The idea of a black being 3/5. And when we use things like calling our enemies termites, dogs, pigs, when we somehow think that humans are not animals, then we start to dehumanize. And when we dehumanize people, we justify killing them. It's very, very hard as a psychologist and as a rabbi to look at what's going on and not be appalled. And so I'm going to speak about I absolutely love Israel. I love people. And you've got to ask, if two brothers are in a room and one's beating up on the other, do you simply pin the one who had been beating the one up and beat up the other brother, and then you're going to have, two bloody eyes and two toothless kids? And so part of the love of Israel is not wanting it to be right, but wanting it to do right.
Would this all have happened had Netanyahu not been there?
I don't know.
Because he seems to be a lightning rod.
I can't, I constantly go back to how different would things have been if somebody hadn't assassinated Rabin.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because
I liked him a lot.
I think he was very popular in the world, and I think he was very level-headed, but there was certainly a radical element in Israel that viewed him as selling out the farm kind of thing. And you've got this problem of two different narratives going on, and I've said it more than once. They're mutually exclusive. They have to be listened to so that we can understand each other, but then we have to go back and see what's reasonable. How do people live together? And I know that we talked about it last time. And part of the real problem is the whole settler issue. And settlers are intent on making it difficult. They want to make it difficult for Israel to give back land, quote unquote.
Oh, these are the new settlements that keep
the new
extending
settlements
out?
Right, the ones that people call illegal, that are, it's occupied land. It's not Israeli land. And if you're going to not afford citizenship to the people who live there, then why are you allowing citizens to live there? It's a good question. And it's an existential issue, because if they extend the vote, if they make citizens out of the Arabs living in the West Bank, then Netanyahu won't have the majority anymore. It's going to change the politics, just as it changed the politics in South Africa. And that's why we're hearing the apartheid claims too. It is and it isn't. Right? It's different, but it has some of the feelings of it. Right? It has some of the quacking of that duck. And I get that. there's
But is it true that a lot of the Palestinians who live in Gaza work in Jerusalem? They
some
work in
do,
Israel?
fewer than used to. When I, she said, dating herself, before the 73 war, many more did. Many more worked in Israel, especially in Gaza, actually. Especially in Gaza. We are really having internet issues today. My guess is that it probably is not as much. I have an idea what the problem is. The old story.
You're flashing again. Oh.
Yeah, I know I am. So there's just not going to be this recording. It'll just be, I'll have to patch in YouTube.
There you
to
go.
Get this one.
Yeah, it's all
going.
yours.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I know what it wants. It wants no internet connection. I don't think that's the problem. I think it's like all the others. It's forcing you to do the update.
Uh-oh.
That's what. Yeah.
The bane of our existence.
Yeah. I think that's
updates.
I think that's the issue, and I don't know how to get there. So it's not letting me do that. So let's see, app settings, reset tips. There we go. All right, that's not what I want.
I could take the tablet up on the roof and throw it.
No, I don't think that's going to help us.
See if it floats.
I don't think. Well, let's try disconnecting and reconnecting. Okay, let's let it go ahead and do its thing. It's going to update, and then we'll rejoin. It is what it is.
Yep.
So anyway, getting back to it, so you've got these conflicting pieces, and that's where the Palestinians say, we were granted this land by England. It's ours by Britain. There's a lot of very ambiguous language in the agreements that Britain made because they intended to weasel and not honor them.
Naturally.
And that's really just the bottom line. They did not intend to honor all of the promises. They made them at a time when they were desperate. And they said whatever they thought would help them in the moment, instead of looking toward what problems is this going to create.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is crazy. It is crazy. And until.
But isn't it interesting that all of their colonies have had problems? I mean, if you think about it.
It's not surprising. In no cases did they, we act like America got it out of nowhere to be obnoxious to our indigenous population. Where, if you look at the atrocities that Columbus did, right?
Father Sarah.
Hispaniola, the whole.
Oh, yeah. 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 You bet. Yeah, the poor indigenous population. And of course, it seems like more and more. I was watching Fox the other night. They found some more stuff up in Canada, in the western part of Canada. Just massive graves of indigenous people, and it's like, really?
And it's not just Canada.
Oh, no.
Look at the Trail of Tears. Look at, there's just, people have been horrible.
And I keep going back to Arizona, but you go to the reservations there, and they're usually pretty desolate places.
Many reservations are. I had not seen the kind of abject poverty that I saw up on the reservations. we still have people without electricity
Oh yeah,
and without
you bet.
water.
Sure.
And it's a very sad, beyond sad. We have not solved our problems, let alone who are we to tell the world what to do. And that's part of. I happen to have been in Israel, as I said, before the 73 war. And what I will tell you is that the refugee camps that had been under Jordanian and under Egyptian administration were deplorable. They really were. They did not have running water. They did not have electricity. And I think that, and this is a guess on my part, I don't have evidence, it's just a gut feeling from looking around, that the money that the UN still pays for refugee camps, which is one of the reasons they're still around, does not, was misappropriated, reappropriated
Oh God.
for many, many years.
Oh.
And in the end, because of the abject poverty that situation created, that states can no longer afford to modernize the refugee camps properly. Israel tried. Israel did. That's one of the things they did properly after 67, was to bring electricity and water, and that's why they have the water. And the other reality is, where else is Gaza going to get it? Because the fresh water is got to come from Israel. It doesn't come from the sea. They have no rivers. They have no natural. They have one river that cuts across, but there's no way it's going to supply enough water by itself to 2.3, 2.4 million people.
Well, and they were talking about this morning. I heard that that the trucks now are being permitted to come in from Egypt, but that the big fear is that Hamas will take all those supplies and not give it to the people.
That's the other piece to realize. Hamas is not the legitimate government of Gaza. They are dictators in every classic sense. They are dictators. They just are. And they terrorize the Palestinians as much as they terrorize anybody else.
They're terrorists.
They are. They're absolutely terrorists. And again, if you listen to the undercurrent of what people are saying, there's a wonderful scene done, I want to say it's either a BBC or it might be CNN. It's one of the news groups is talking to a group of fishermen. And there are people who walk by on the street. You can see them out the window. And the people being interviewed turn to the news person and say something to the effect of, "Be quiet. Those are probably spies from Hamas."
Whoa.
Okay, which gives you, you want to talk about putting a chill down your back, right? The people are afraid. They are as likely to be carried off, shot, beheaded as Israelis are. The Palestinians living in Gaza are as much victims of Hamas as anybody else. They're not happy about it. So they're living with this narrative, right? Hamas is telling them, "Oh, we're going to liberate it," but they have no illusions that's going to would be good. But they have to sing the party line. And it's this push that you're either with us or against us. That's A, immature, and B, a big fallacy, because there's a whole lot of variation. It's not black and white.
Well, and
in fact, that's called the black and white fallacy.
Okay, and I was watching something, I think it was on the BBC channel, where they said, Israel is bombing a bunch of, Gaza. Yet a lot of the leadership of Hamas
is underground, or
not there.
Not there.
but in Jordan,
Yeah.
in Egypt, and they said in Britain.
Wouldn't surprise me. They're anywhere.
I was shocked.
You know, I think that they are not living. They are not living in the issues that that Palestinians are living in. Right? They're using it to get money to live.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, yeah. There's so many lies within lies that are being exploited by so many people on so many sides that the victims are the innocents on both sides. And, you know, and the people who constantly say, well, why doesn't Saudi Arabia take in the refugees? Why doesn't Jordan take in the refugees? And the answer is very simple. It's that these people have an own land. As bad as it is, they own land in that area. They owned land. You know, there are just so many spins on the details.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The spins on both sides. It's, and I'm trying to remember if it was somebody at Kaiser who said, if you give the same 30 minutes of video to Fox News and MSNBC, by the time it hits the news, you won't know that it's the same video on either side, right? Because of the agendas within some networks. Because you pick and choose and spin. And everybody does it. Everybody does it. You know, the Arabs living in the areas behind the green lines, the occupied areas, they own land there. They own farms that they've farmed for generations. Yeah, they're refugees, but they're refugees from places, and that's part of the other part, right? That's the argument of return to us the value of the homes that we lost in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. And there are families that carry the keys to those homes on their necks. So you're talking about, it's becoming almost biblical in the narrative quality. And that's part of the problem. Because clearly, neither narrative has stayed to the documentable facts. I guess that's the best way I can say it. Right? And they're mutually exclusive. And if Israel were to annex the West Bank and grant citizenship, there would be a numerical problem for some of the politicians. It would change the politics, just as South Africa's politics changed when they incorporated the black vote. And that doesn't mean that the politics are going to be any more or less corrupt than they currently are. And I have no illusions that politics is innocent and not corrupt, both here and abroad. Yeah, we've got problems here in the US. And the other part that really strikes me, and I know I've talked about it other times, is if we look at the difference between the incarceration rate and attitude of America versus the incarceration rate and attitude of the Germans, we find, you know, you're blown away by the Germans. They have about 1/10 the incarceration rate that we have, but they're in line with most of the quote unquote developed world in their numbers, but their crime rate is way, way, way lower than the US. Also about 9 times lower or 10 times lower. It's hugely different. And I think that comes out of something that, granted, and I'm not forgetting, I am the daughter of survivors. I have no illusions that the Nazis didn't kill millions of Jews and millions of other people. And you can't get into a numbers game, because it loses. You turn off people more than you turn them on with that kind of game, because it is a game. My tragedy is bigger than your tragedy. My dog's bigger than your dog. His name's King, and he just had puppies. I don't know if you remember that song.
Yeah.
Right. And you can Google that one, folks. My dog's bigger than your dog. It's a great song about that. And the other one that goes along with that is, what did you learn in school today? You really want to pull out some old liberal songs out of ancient history. And but when you look at what Germany has done in the aftermath, right? The first clause in their constitution today is the autonomy and the dignity of a human being shall not be violated. It's inviolable. And based on that, prisoners in German prisons have a single prisoner to a single cell. They have the keys to their cell, and they're treated like human beings.
And they can even go out and work.
Toward the end of their sentence, right, the last 6 months, they are encouraged to leave during the day, find a job, find a place to live when they leave. So they're absolutely invited to start integrating into life, so that when they leave, they'll be able to. What a radical thought.
Well, and that's what at least we learned in school, that the American prisons would rehabilitate and educate and send them back out. But
Yeah.
we all know that's not true.
Yeah, it's not happening. It's not happening. It's not happening at all. I wish it was.
But I thought what the president had to say last night was good, although he kind of mangled it when he was going from Europe to Israel and back. But I don't think he went far enough, because I think somewhere Iran's got to be behind all this stuff. I mean,
Iran's funding it. I was actually having that discussion on the way into the studio with one of my colleagues in town, and another clergy person. And Iran absolutely wants to break up Saudi. What they do not want is the Saudi peace plan. They do not want that to go through, because if Israel makes peace with the Palestinians, then that allows Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the US to stop Iran's expansionist plans.
I saw something on Twitter this morning where Emirates and Saudi Arabia were saying, let's bury our differences, because I think we need to start getting the talks back. And I thought, whoa.
Yeah.
Because they're not friends with Iran either.
No, the Saudis and Iran have very different. They're two different kinds of Muslims, and they have very different political aspirations and attitudes. The Saudis are not looking to control all of the Arab world. Iran is. It wants to control it wants to control whatever had the biggest chunk of land. They want to, quote unquote, restore the glory time of Islam,
But
of the Moors.
If you look at the man and woman on the street in Iran, they just want to be free.
Most people just want to take care of their kids
Yeah,
and let their kids grow up and be healthy.
yeah, exactly.
And, so one of the things that always gets to me is when people say, well, when they love their kids more than they hate us, there'll be peace. Well, when we love our kids more than we hate them, we'll make peace. Let's flip all of these little cutesy comments. And, there's one of the things that I tell people, if you are making some comment about some out group, flip it and make it about your in group. And if you don't like what you're saying, if you think it's discriminatory, then don't say it about somebody else.
Ooh. Yeah.
Because that's an in group, out group bias. And, that worked when we were hunter gatherers and there were limited resources on the world. But I have to tell you, I was blown away and shocked this past week when I turned to my IRSC students are younger than the Kaiser students as a rule. There are still quite a few under 25 at Kaiser.
We have a lot of second career people at Kaiser.
We have more second career people, and we have a lot of veterans. Mm-hmm. Whereas IRSC, thanks to dual enrollment and the Promise group, is very young.
They're kids.
They are kids.
Yeah.
They don't have prefrontal cortex is fully developed yet. But I asked them, how many of you think there are enough resources in the world to sustain the people on the planet? And only about half raised their hands.
Ooh.
Yeah. I did not. I would have expected onesie twosies to think resources were scarce. But if we've got a scarce resource mentality, then we are setting up a have and have nots environment. And
which is never peaceful.
Is never peaceful. And then when you add greed to it, and I guess that was a real aha to me. And it makes me now want to do a man in the street or woman in the street, person in the street kind of survey, and just ask that question: are there enough resources on the planet? And who's entitled to those resources? Are we going to become a planet of human beings? If we ascribe to the Jewish, Muslim, Christian viewpoint, then didn't God create us all? Hello.
One would think.
One would think, you don't even have to go all the way back to the Adam and Eve story. Just go to Noah. Are we not all descendants of Noah and Noah's wife? Which, by the way, one of his kids was Shem, which is where Semites come from, which is why Muslims say they're not anti-Semitic, or Arabs say they're not anti-Semitic because they themselves are Semitic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's there are enough resources on this planet, and there's enough knowledge. The farmers that are growing crops or were growing crops in Gaza, I'm not sure how much are surviving the current issues, but they're doing hydroponics. Israelis are doing hydroponics. Disney has been doing hydroponics since I've been married, because on our honeymoon trip, we went and saw the hydroponic farms that Disney was starting at the time. We know how to grow enough food. We know we even farm, cultivate. We test tube grow meat.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's expensive still, but if we really put our scientists to the test, then we'll figure that out. But not if we kill ourselves before we get there. And, I am distraught over the violence. And yes, Hamas needs to be neutralized. And I'm going to use that term. I'm not going to say we need to get smarter, because the old way is not working. It's only making them stronger and stronger.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving them more cannon fodder. And they really do, they really view foot soldiers as cannon fodder. And they have brainwashed, but if you leave them with a bunch of orphans, you're leaving them with a group to harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those will become ideologically powerful, and they may be very clever. The coldness with which they operated in the kibbutzim and at the festival, and the information they had about who lived in which houses, the amount of intel that came on those printed sheets.
Oh yeah.
Is, you want to talk about what's really chilling, is that. So I have no doubts that Iran's funding some of that.
Wow.
And probably sitting there and combing social media to see what people post. And yeah, it's really tragic. And the answer is not bigger and bigger strikes against each other, because that way we'll just have a whole lot of blind and toothless people if they survive. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb, and this has been one of my saddest Ask a Rabbis.
Yeah, it just keeps getting sadder.
Yeah, it does.
It's terrible.
So everybody, hug your neighbor, even one you may not like. Let's move the human species forward. Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Congregation Eitz Chayim. This has been Ask a Rabbi.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Talking the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world on your TuneIn app.